Okay, so from the Huckleberry restaurant and pub, we went to the old Erasmus Castle. Yo, what a freaky castle it was. So, but unfortunately, there wasn't any time to do a video there to tell you guys where we were. So
We're just quickly jumping in to let you know.
just doing a little bit of a thing here. Yeah, so yes, Erasmus Castle, freaky old place.
Unfortunately, however, they closed the castle to the public a few years ago. I think he said it was 15 to 20 years ago. They closed the castle to the public because people were vandalizing the property and all of those things. So, unfortunately, it was only from the outside. We didn't get to go in, but we did learn a great deal about the history and the family and heard some spooky ghost stories.
Yeah, the gates were locked, guys, so we couldn't even go in the yard. So we had to kind of work it from the pavement, or what do you call it?
Like criminals.
Yeah, through the fence. Yeah, but we got a few pictures of the place. It's gorgeous from the outside.
Really beautiful.
Yeah, our tour or jaunt guide told us that there's nothing much to see on the inside, just some old furniture. I don't really know, but yeah, the public's not allowed to go there anymore. But yeah, we caught the history of the place, and you'll see.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen.
There's two parts over here. The first part is a brief history of the paranormal, and then once I finish that, we're going to walk around to the back so we can have a proper look at the spoor case, the Erasmus Castle. Right, so you got a brief science of the paranormal at Magnolia Dell. I'm now going to give you a brief history of the paranormal. But the first thing that I want to tell you is that when we are dealing with the paranormal, we are not dealing with the world of the solid. We're dealing with the world of the unsolid. There's a very big difference. Although you might find that inside the Raadsaal tonight, hopefully we will get in, and inside the graveyard, you never know. Something very solid might just suddenly appear, just like that. You'll never know. Thank you very much. You can switch your thoughts. The example you will know of course, is Egypt, where the dead are buried with their household possessions. There's still all the cultures that do that to this day. But what I'm trying to impress upon you is the fact that our species knew from 70,000 years ago that there was an afterlife. And so that's why they buried people with their household possessions, because they thought it might be needed in the afterlife, which is not needed at all. So it's quite an interesting thing that our species should have known about the afterlife so early. In fact, old cave paintings, even further back than that, show that our species did know about an afterlife. The most ancient recorded, because now I'm talking prehistory. Now, history itself only started maybe 5,000 years ago, recorded history. When the Sumerians invented writing, they were the first people to invent writing, as we know. So the first ghost stories are in their writings. But one of the most interesting ghost stories actually comes from the Egyptians, and there's a very well-known one. One day, Tutmos IV was walking through the hot desert sands of Egypt. He was barefoot, and it proved to be too hot for him. Egypt can get very, very hot. You can imagine it's not far from the equator. And he decided to go and rest behind a certain monument. And he rested in the cool, in the shade of that monument. And when he did that, he fell into a very, very deep sleep. And when he fell into this very, very deep sleep, he fell into a dream state. And in that dream state came to him a very strange and a very gruff voice, which said to him, "Tutmos, move. When you become Pharaoh one day, I want you to tidy up the bottom of my tomb." Because this was the tomb that he had rested behind. And when he did become Pharaoh one day, he cleared away the sands at the bottom of the tomb. Now, at this particular tomb, for many, many centuries, the head was visible. But now, for the first time, something else also became visible when the sands were cleared away. And they were the two paws. It's this figure that sort of lies forward with two claws and a big head. Anybody guess what I'm... The Sphinx, exactly. Now, if you don't believe me, if you haven't been to Egypt, go and look between the two paws. There is a dream stele. It's copper plated, and it has that exact story. Now, we are celebrating Halloween, and Halloween is celebrated 7 days up until the 31st of October and 7 days thereafter. So a full 14 days in most cultures. And a lot of people don't know the beginnings of Halloween. One of the oldest stories we know takes place 2,500 years ago in ancient Rome. Okay? So that's 500 BC that I'm talking about. That's a long time ago. And what would happen is, on a particular night, which was Halloween night, the head of the household would remove his shoes. Oh, stop smiling, only his shoes, nothing else. And he would walk through the house, throwing little sugar beans over his shoulders as treats, hoping that the evil spirits would follow and eat the treats and not play their evil tricks on the household or the crops or their livestock, which they relied upon for food. Trick or treat, ancient Rome, 2,500 years ago. Halloween. Long before the Celts took it over, which they called Beltane and Samhain, and they would then dress up in the scariest of outfits they possibly could to scare away the evil spirits. They would also put out food and drink to appease the evil spirits. Why did they do this? Because when it came to harvest time, the last thing you wanted to do was lose your food. Because we didn't have pick and pays back then, all right? Or even fridges all those centuries ago. For a moment I thought there was a jackal call. I think it's the people celebrating the Bokke.
Yeah, the kick-off. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about to kick off.
There we go.
Go Booker, go.
So if there was a flood or a drought or a fire or some plague of locusts that would damage the crops, or some disease like the rinderpest that might affect and kill your cattle, you were in trouble. You would then have to barter to get food from another farm nearby. So you were in great trouble. And they thought that evil spirits were causing these fires and droughts and diseases. All right? And so that is why they put out the food and the drink and why they dressed up in scary outfits. So now you know the reason. Okay? Then the Catholic Church took it over because they had a thing called All Saints' Day on the 1st of November, which celebrated the souls of the dead. And so what they did was also celebrate the souls of the dead the night before. And they called it All Hallowed Evening. What does hallowed mean? It just means holy, that's all. So it was called Hallowed Evening, became shorter, just Hallow Evening, then Hallow Even, and then Halloween, and eventually Halloween. So the word just got shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Now, every year, except this year, I must say this is the first year in 23 years that we've run. We've had nobody complain, but normally fundamentalists will write on our Facebook page, "Oh, you're practicing the devil's night." And I feel like replying, "Oh my God, you're so stupid." But I don't do that because I'm a nice person, except at the very end of the tour in the graveyard. And I tell them to go and read up on Wikipedia. But of course, one thing about a fundamentalist is you can never change their minds. And they never do go to Wikipedia. If they did, they would find out what I've just told you. So today we know that floods, fires, plagues of locusts, diseases like the rinderpest that infect cattle and so forth, we know these are natural disasters. And therefore, we know they are not evil spirits that are causing them. So Halloween has now just become a fun time for us to celebrate a past that we once had. And it's also a fun time for the kids as well. And they go out and they get lots of sweets and lots of chocolates and hopefully don't end up with diabetes. So now you know the story about Halloween. I will tell you a little extra story at the graveyard later on about the jack-o'-lantern. Then we move to ancient Greece. Socrates was a great philosopher. And the ancient Greeks were amongst the greatest philosophers in the world. Before Socrates, what we call the pre-Socratics. Amongst them was a man called Pythagoras, great philosopher. You've all heard of Pythagoras. You learned the theorem of Pythagoras. The theorem, yes, and I'm going to get to that. Thank you for that. So, on our Johannesburg tour a few years ago, there was a lady that had a few too many red wines, and she knew all about Pythagoras because we studied it in maths. And she said, "Oh, yeah. I remember him, the mathematician, the one with the square on the hippopotamus." She obviously was trying to say that she knew about Pythagoras' theorem of the hypotenuse, right? Yes. But anyway, we all laughed what seemed like a whole hour. It was wonderful. I'll never forget that. But he was also a philosopher, and he was also a mystic. A lot of people don't know that. And he would gather people into a circle, like we're going to do later on our climax in the graveyard. But we won't be holding a seance. But he would hold a seance, and it would be in a dark room, and people would stand in a circle holding hands. They would have a candlelight, and there would be a table. And the table would then float up into the air. And as it did that, they would ask questions to the table. And the table would do this for yes, would do this for no, and it would do that for I don't know. But you know what? There's always a rotten apple in the basket, is there not? And so somebody sometimes would play the fool with the table, and they would ask it a stupid question just to be silly, which would upset the table. You know what the table would then do? It would then float higher and higher up until it got almost to the ceiling, and then it would suddenly dart at that person, and they would not play the fool with the table again. Do you understand? Yeah. Very good. So, that was the forerunner of the oui in French, meaning yes, and in German, ja, meaning yes. The forerunner of the Ouija board, right? In South Africa, we play a different version of it with a glass and pieces of paper with the letters of the alphabet on it. And everybody puts their fingers on the glass and it moves, just like the planchette moves on the Ouija board. What do we call it?
Classy.
Glassy. Right. That's another complaint we get on our Facebook group. We call up the dead. Really? We're not spiritualists, we don't call up the dead. In the 1850s, Charles Darwin came along with a theory of evolution, which today is a fact. And it doesn't matter that it's a fact. Because why can evolution not be God's method for creating life? It can very well be. But they didn't think that back in the 1850s with Darwin. A lot of people thought that now religion and spirituality had been given a death blow. And so arose what was called spiritualism, where people then did hold seances and called up the dead and spoke to them and so forth and so on. Then we had another paradigm shift, the Middle Ages, where we had witch burnings all over the world. It even happened in America, the witch hunts of Salem. It wasn't just the Catholic Church in Europe. It was a terrible time. If you were scientifically minded, you had a problem, because the Catholic Church in those days said that the earth was the center of the whole universe, which is absolutely untrue. I mean, we live in a spiral galaxy, and we're just a little pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan said, on just one of those little spirals, when by no means the center. But if you said in those days that the earth went round the sun, instead of what the Catholic Church was saying is that they said the sun went round the earth, they burnt you to death. And what a horrible, can you imagine being burnt alive? In fact, did you know, it's something I learned in the past few years, that even people that were pregnant and were not married, even they were burnt at the stake. So I don't know how many you've got in there, twins, maybe I think I've got twins, I'm not sure. But thank God we don't live in those times. We might have been burnt at the stake for all we know. By the way, this is Pop Water and this friend over here. And Oliver, I should say, who we must thank. He helped promote our tours for Halloween. Thank you very much for coming along on the tour tonight. Thank God we don't live in those times anymore. The fire has changed. It was by the 1920s. We learned something that the pre-Socratic Greeks knew, Heraclitus. He said everything is made up of small bundles of fire going in and out of existence. How right he was, because in the 1920s, there were very clever people. Max Planck, he was the one that started it, followed by Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, eventually down to Einstein. There were about 20 of them. They discovered a thing called quantum physics. And what did they discover? They discovered the world is not solid. So did the pre-Socratic Greeks. Leucippus and Empedocles said everything is made up of atoms. And so the atoms were discovered in the 1920s for real, and they discovered quantum physics. And what did we discover about the atom? The atom is made up of 3 smaller particles. Anybody want to name them? Neutrons, protons, and electrons. Neutrons got no charge. The protons have a positive charge. The electrons have a negative charge. That's why I said to you, everything has a force field around it, because everything is made up of atoms. So everything has at least an electric force field around it. We're lucky we have 5 force fields. Now, here comes an interesting point. Here's the electron. I shall leave it there and step over here. Here's the proton and the neutron. Guess what? The protons and the neutrons are made up of smaller particles, starting with a Q. Anybody here know what they're called? Quarks. Did you say quarks?
Yes.
Give the man a big hand! Yes. So nice when people are well read. That's exactly what they're called. They're called quarks. And quarks, the same as electrons, in that they are not solid particles. Let me explain it like this to you. Think of Guy Fawkes. Think of Diwali. Think of a lot of celebrations where you light one of those sparklers. You know the sparklers at Guy Fawkes? Yes. Now, if you could whisk that sparkler fast enough, like a ball of string, yes? The lines of which are just fire, just energy. That will look like a round particle to you, all right? But all it is bunched up energy, a quantum of energy, hence the word quantum physics. So take energy, bunch it up like spaghetti, a ball of spaghetti, and it looks and feels solid. Spread it out flat like lasagna, and it will look like nothing. But if you go to outer space and you take the vacuum of space and you compress it, it will produce energy, which will produce matter. Except that what I've just told you is that there is no such thing as matter, it's just bunched up energy. If you go onto Google right now and you Google the word matter, guess what it will say? Two things. Something that has mass and something that occupies volume. But there's no solid stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, this must sound extremely strange to you, but there is no solid stuff anywhere in this universe, or if there is a multiverse, not there either. The only reason that this looks and feels solid is because the energy is so tightly bundled together that it looks that way, feels that way. And I am that way as well, which is why I am looking solid and thinking I'm touching something. So, is there a difference between the solid and the unsolid? No, there isn't. Because there is no solid stuff in there. So thinking about that, that is exactly how ghosts exist. They exist in that flattened out state of energy. Then, if they've got enough energy, they can form a mist, eventually a vortex, eventually a round little thing called, starts with an O,
An orb.
or if they've got enough energy, they can manifest themselves as a full apparition. So I hope that the history and the science has now been combined and you understand a lot more about the paranormal. Before we go now and have a look at the back of the castle, and I'll tell you the fascinating history of this place. One night we're standing here, there's a lady, and she starts really scaring us because she says, you know, we're being watched. You know, you don't say that to people because they get a little bit scared. And she said, yes, and we've been watched from behind, which makes people even more scared because you don't know what's behind you. Turn and look. So I said, what are you talking about? So she says to me, I don't know, but it looks like a witch. I said, listen, I don't believe in witches. Witches is all part of mythology. What are you talking about? She said, I don't know, but it's an old, crinkly face with wrinkles and grey hair. And there's a mole on the cheek. And it's got red eyes. And it is watching us right now. So I said, where is this thing that you're talking about? So she said, you see the stop sign there? Well, just behind it, look there. There's a big tree. You see the big tree? Mm-hmm. She said, there it is with the red eyes.
Come on. Ay, mama. Okay, talk.
Well, I'm talking absolute nonsense. But I thought it might just get you into the mood. So that's before the Second Anglo-Boer War began. And it was completed after the Second Anglo-Boer War in 1904. So it took a long time, 14 years to build, and I'm not surprised because it's got 7 different types of architecture. Jugendstil, Art Deco, Art Nouveau, Arts and Crafts. It's got Edwardian, it's got Victorian, Queen Anne. So it's a lot of mix of architecture, and because of that, it is the most archetypal or the most iconic looking spookhouse in the whole of South Africa. There is nothing that even resembles it in South Africa. You'll find them overseas, particularly in America. I don't know if any of you have seen that movie called Winchester.
Yes.
The Winchester Mansion. It's very haunted indeed. It was the voortrekkers. You know, they were the major voortrekking tracks. A lot of people thought they came from Cape Town. They didn't come. By that time, the Afrikaans folk had become Boers, had become voortrekkers or trek Boers. And the voortrekking began in Graafrenet, Grahamstown, Bathurst, and areas like that in the Eastern Cape, not in Cape Town as some people think. There were quite a few major tracks. You've all heard of Hendrik Potgieter and so forth. One of the groups that split off, because the groups also had divisions, was the Erasmus family. And the Erasmus family owned a lot of plots of ground here, starting right down from Smuts House, right up until this area. In fact, if you look behind you, all of that was the Erasmus farm. There were no buildings here. It was veld, open veld. Over there, open veld. Over there, open veld. Behind where Armscore, who now owns the castle, was open veld. That's all it was. And just a dust road for the ox wagons and the horse carriages and the horses. So it's been around for a long, long, long time indeed. It was built for Joachimus Erasmus, who was a very interesting man indeed, very eccentric. He would have garden parties out here at night. He would have soirees. He would have balls and people with lovely ballroom gowns inside the house. Yet by day, he would take his walk stick and demonically pulp the earthworms. I have no idea why, because earthworms are so good for the earth. They used to have a tour here. It was a half-hour tour once a month during the day, and they stopped it about 15 years ago because the public were damaging the inside. It doesn't matter though, because the inside is extremely boring. There's just some old furniture, that's it. It's the outside which looks much better than the inside. And that's why we are lucky enough to have got permission to go into the Raadsaal, which is very impressive. But what are the stories? Well, one of the first stories is, it is rumored that some of his children were born as lepers, and he didn't want the public to see them, and so he built a playroom for them, and they played there in the town. I'm just looking there on the balcony. You see the balcony sticking out? I'm just checking. I see the curtains are closed, but sometimes the curtains move, or they haven't moved yet. If they do, we shall see it at some stage, but we won't worry now. Ooh, that's in my eyes. And so he didn't want the public to see the leper children. He had other children who were not lepers as well. Now, when he lived here, the place was in good keep, in good nick. When he left, it wasn't. It started becoming rather dilapidated. And in those days, when it became dilapidated, people didn't think anybody lived here. But there was one old Erasmus relative who was 80 odd years old who did stay on in the castle. And that's where it got its name, Die Spookhuis. In fact, in the last half of the last century, they actually filmed a movie here. And it's called Hier's ons weer. Here we are again. And it had Frederick Burgers, the famous Afrikaans actor, and the famous Afrikaans comedian with the big eyes.
Al Debo.
Al Debo, exactly. And guess what? It's on YouTube. And last year, I think it was last year, they made a colorized version of it, so you can go and watch it. It's called He's ons Weer on YouTube. It's quite an interesting old movie. So that's how spooky this house looked. One night there was a fire here in the veld, and the firemen, like everybody else, thought that nobody lived in the building. This was unfortunate for the firemen, because when they came up with the fire engines in those days, they had those huge clanking bells which made a hell of a noise. When they arrived here and the bells were still clanking and going off, the old man woke up and he ran out onto that balcony. And when he did, unfortunately for the firemen, he was dressed in the typical Victorian Edwardian pajamas, and you know what they look like. They're white, with a white nightcap. Now, if you want to see anything looking spooky, I don't think you get anything looking more spooky than that. And he screamed because of the fire because he thought the fire was coming towards the castle, and the clanking of the bells. With this commotion, he screamed like hell, and the firemen took one look at this white apparition screaming at them. They thought it was a ghost and they ran away. Only when some of them started coming back and he took his nightcap off and they realized that he was a human and he started speaking to them, only then did they put the fire out. Thank God, because otherwise there wouldn't be a castle there today. So that's one of the funniest stories of the castle. Then the family revamped the castle a little bit and they let it out. The old man passed on. And when they let it out to a family. And one night, the little girl of that family ran up to her mother and she said, "Mommy, Mommy, the little girl that I used to play with there upstairs in the tower room, dressed in the old-fashioned clothing, is no longer there." It was then that her mother realized that she was not playing with an imaginary friend. You know, kids have imaginary friends, right? How do we know this? Because she mentioned the words old-fashioned clothing, right? So we believe that she was playing with one of the ghosts of the Erasmus children. Then Armscore, which is next door, took the castle over in 1980. Funny, that's almost the reverse of 1890 when they started building it. And in 1980, they had opening night here to celebrate the revamping of the castle, which I'm very glad they did. So that's why it looks so good today from the outside. Not that good inside, but outside at least it looks very good. And Bertrand Retief, who was one of the top personnel of Armscore, happened to walk into the garden and he saw a man approximately down there who was on his own. So he went up to the gentleman guest and he said, "Sir, are you okay? Are you feeling ill? Well, can I help you in any way?" He said, "No, not at all. I was just following the lady that you hired, dressed in period costume to suit the theme of your party. And I must say, she looks very splendid indeed." So Bertrand Retief said, "What lady?" And the guest said, "Oh, the one over there." And he had to stop mid-sentence because she was no longer there. And this is very well recorded in a book called Ghosts of Pretoria by Eric Bolzmann. Bertrand Retief took that gentleman inside and showed him photographs hanging on the wall, and he was able to identify the very lady he had seen in the garden. He had seen one of the Erasmus family ghosts himself. Now, a lot of people ask me if I've had ghostly experiences. I have. Not many, but when I have, they have been very credible. And in 2019, even though we started these tours in 2001, in 2019, somebody said, "There's those curtains on the balcony are moving." That's why I always check to see if they're closed, which they are tonight. And then they captured a hand, it's not very clear, taking the curtains and moving them to the side and then holding the curtains to the side sometimes. We got several videos. Unfortunately, they were taken on cell phones. I wish somebody had a normal camera because we would have got even a better view of it, you know, but it doesn't matter. We got it on video. We're going to pop it onto the WhatsApp group.
But it's constantly moving as well, eh?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how I'm seeing it. Kyk hier my Bob.
The camera.
Yeah, you can see it on the camera if you take a video.
Picture this side. When you check on the camera, you can actually see the curtain move.
Yeah.
If you check on the camera, you can actually see
Yeah. Look. There, it's like something was standing there.
Are you on video?
Yes.
Keep videoing.
Yes.
I want this, please. I've got to have it.
It's like somebody standing there and they moved quick.
On another night, also in 2019, whoever was moving the curtains actually appeared at the window. People asked, do we see ghosts on tours? There are times when we do. We can't make them appear, and we dare not call them up because, as I said, that's not a good idea at all. We pick them up on ghost hunting apps, or we get photographs, or we see them. And there she was, standing at the window. We don't know who she is, but she's dressed in black. She's got black hair, and she's got an open neck piece. Yeah, and you can see her skin. And somebody with a phone, about 7 or 8 people actually caught it.
I know that the paranormal is real. Listen. The paranormal is real. The paranormal is real.